Finding love at the clock tower. Finding love at the clock tower, for me, is about so many things. But if I could sum it all up, I would say it's about finding innocence and beauty in the most unlikely of places. Here at the clock tower in Cartagena. And I say unlikeliest of places because many people would think that a place where sex workers work would be someplace that would be sordid or sleazy, when the truth is the complete opposite. There is just such innocence and beauty here that it is just incredible to me. And so I want to talk more about innocence, because innocence really has to do with the purity and goodness of your heart. And women who are out here fighting for their families, here in Colombia or Venezuela, or for their own lives, are innocent and beautiful to me, and simply victims of a world economy, of an economy that gives them very few other options to survive. And so yes, sex workers can be innocent and pure. Now I chose these video clips, these 3 first video clips, to start this series because they are how I see the clock tower at night. It is not a place that is full of sex workers. It is a place full of human beings, beautiful people, people that I appreciate and love. Now people may think that an environment, a place where women congregate at night that are sex workers, is going to be someplace that is sordid or sleazy. But on the contrary, it is actually something so wholesome and natural here in Cartagena. In the background, you literally have children playing hide and seek, riding their bicycles, vendors selling their wares, tourists walking by. It is just a natural part of life, and it is something beautiful to me. And you know, the government of Cartagena and Colombia may have reservations about the visibility of sex workers and sex tourism here in Cartagena. But the simple fact is they are not hiding women away. And if anything, I think Cartagena should take note of a city like Amsterdam that has a red light district, and it is simply a part of life. They are not in some sleazy red light district or some slum part of the city. They are out here in the open for all to see. And that is how it should be. Because whether people want to realize it or not, sex workers are a part of life in this world. They are a symptom of the world that we have created, of the world economy. And they are a way that people have tried to survive. Make the point that you cannot stereotype sex workers any more than you can stereotype anybody because of the color of their skin. And perhaps my biggest inspiration for the making of this video are the women of the clock tower of Cartagena. Women who I have learned in getting to know have defied every stereotype that I have had about the lives of sex workers. Women who have impressed me so much that I have wanted to speak on their behalf. Now, I'm from the United States and a native New Yorker. And as a citizen of the United States, you know, we live under the perception that we live in a society that celebrates democracy and diversity, including diversity of opinion. Very little conversation about the corporate culture on this planet that strives to keep wages incredibly low and profits incredibly high. how a company like Apple can pay $1.50 or $2 an hour to people to assemble phones in China while it makes extraordinary profits and parks its money in an offshore bank account to keep from having to pay taxes anywhere. Do we have any conversation about the ethics behind that? And do all of you who buy those Apple products think about the fact that you're participating in a world economy that drives down wages so much that people find it more to their benefit to sell their bodies than they do to work jobs? And the corporate media in the United States would have us think that sex trafficking is the biggest reason why anybody turns to sex work, when the reality is that it's poverty and ridiculously low wages. And so, who is the biggest pimp on this planet? It is consumers who quietly participate in a corporate world economy that strives to drive down wages, maximize profits, all at the expense of the majority of the world's population. And so here is some diverse thinking. The fact is, being a sex worker in Thailand, the Dominican Republic, or Colombia is actually a really good job if you look at it from the point of view of how much you work and how much you earn, and the possibility of benefits. Now, if we looked at 3 countries, let's say Thailand, Colombia, and the Dominican Republic, 3 countries where sex work is prominent, a prominent part of the economies of those countries, and we looked at the wage structure and the worker protections, etc. in those countries, you will find very similar things. And you will find that sex work in those countries fills an important gap in the economies of those countries to help feed the poor. Sex work is a way of life in many countries around the world. For instance, here in Colombia, in smaller towns than Cartagena, it is not uncommon for husbands and boyfriends to escort their wives and girlfriends to the public square to go and work as sex workers for a few hours, and for those husbands and boyfriends to then wait for their wives and girlfriends and escort them home. That is how much sex work is a way of life here in Colombia. And what is the United States' response to things like sex work, homelessness, and drug use? You know what our response has been? It has been to lock people up. It has been to hide away prostitutes and homeless people. It is basically to remove the visibility of these things more than anything else. And so has the prohibition of drugs, alcohol, and prostitution actually served the purpose that it was intended? For example, in the United States, there is a movement by sex workers to decriminalize sex work so that sex workers can work and function in the system as legal entities. And so I see it as a maturity of Colombian and many European societies that they deal with this issue of prostitution with openness and honesty. Now I wanted to talk about the perception, especially here in Colombia, about sex workers. And I have many people tell me that sex workers are bad girls. And what do I have to say about this? You know, I have women who I'm friends with who are not sex workers who tell me those are bad girls. And I always say to them, I say, well, do you know every woman that works at the clock tower as a sex worker? You know their personal circumstances? You know about them that you can make such a generalization and say that they are all bad? And they sort of look at me perplexed that I am defending the sex workers of the clock tower. Prostitution is legal in Colombia and lightly regulated. Things like brothels are illegal, but they happen in some cities in Colombia. and most women work of their own volition due to economic circumstances. And in general, prostitution and sex work is just a part of life in Colombia. And many people tell me that women who are sex workers do not need to be or have to be sex workers. And that is the general perception. Oh, these women don't have to be sex workers. They have lots of other options. And then when I actually ask them about their other options, people sort of mum up. They have nothing more to say. They just want to have an easy conclusion. These are bad women who have other options and yet want to be sex workers. And when I ask them the details of that, you know what? They really have nothing to say. Okay, they have no further explanation of that, and which basically tells me that in many ways, in Colombian society, there is sort of this mixed message about prostitution. It's legal and open, but they kind of want to keep it on the down low and discourage it, you know. So, it's kind of interesting.
Nice video.
I had a friend of mine, a Colombian woman in her 30s, who, is a music teacher and has a job and somewhat of a life. And when I talked to her about the sex workers, she said to me, well, she said, you know what the worst thing is when they actually do it because they enjoy having sex. And this just reminds me that Colombia comes from a very Catholic Christian background with very conflicting ideas about sex, sexuality, and women. But in general, I've gotten a diversity of opinion. I spoke to one young woman, a friend of mine, who's in college in Colombia, and she kind of comes from a family that can actually support her and help her. Her father is in some form of government in Colombia. He provides her with a home and pays for her to go to college. And she said to me about a friend of hers, she said, one of my best friends is a sex worker, and I don't judge her. She doesn't really have any other options. So, the opinions about sex work go across the board. But in general, I would say the biggest reason is because people's options are just so limited. I wanted to talk about why the making of Finding Love at the Clock Tower is important to me. And I think the biggest reason why is because I wanted to defy people's stereotypical thinking about both sex workers and sex tourists and sex tourism. Because misinformation does not serve anybody's best interest, and it certainly does not serve the best interest of these women or of their lives. And so I wanted to talk about some of the experiences that women have told me they have in being sex workers in Cartagena. One woman I spoke to, I asked her about, how long she's been a sex worker in Cartagena and what her experiences are like. And she told me in 5 years of working in Cartagena as a sex worker that she has never had a bad experience. And that overall, she actually likes her job. But I want to remind all of you that this is in the context of what her options are, which are really very limited. The minimum wage here in Colombia is about $300 a month. That is about $75 a week. And you can make maybe $50 an hour in Cartagena as a sex worker. So you have to understand that in a few short hours working as a sex worker, you could make the minimum wage in a month here. I had another young woman tell me that it was not uncommon for men to pay her and not even have sex with her. Men would pay her just to have dinner with her or to go to the beach. Men would pay her just to have the company of a beautiful young woman. So do bad things happen? Of course. There are men who are victimized by dishonest women, and there are women who are, mistreated by men. But I've even had women at the clock tower tell me things like, be careful, a lot of these girls will steal things from your hotel room, and things such as that. So, um, you know, these girls are actually, looking out for you in many ways. I think as a person who is an experienced world traveler and knowledgeable about the world we live in, that it would be wise for all of us to reframe our ideas that we have both about sex work, sex workers, and sex tourism. The fact is, the vast majority of women who are sex workers in Thailand, Colombia, and the Dominican Republic do so completely of their own volition. And sex work fills an important gap in the world economy and literally feeds hundreds of millions of children on this planet. And does anybody live under the illusion that the world economy is going to change tomorrow, that we're going to create an international minimum wage, that the living standards of people are going to go up anytime soon? The simple fact is these women need decent paying jobs to support themselves and their families, and they already have them as being sex workers. So is it possible to regulate and control sex work and sex tourism to the benefit of everyone? Now let me just give you an example. If we took Germany and Austria, two countries where prostitution is legal, brothels are legal, all of these things are regulated and controlled, and sex workers are protected as legal employees, very few actual German women, German citizens, turn to being sex workers. And you know why? Because they have better options and better protections. Germany has relatively high wages. It has excellent social benefits. It has inexpensive university. So women in Germany and Austria have better economic options than to be sex workers. And that's exactly what they need in countries like Colombia. So my suggestion would be that Colombia and Cartagena actually promote sex tourism and should look at cities like Bangkok, for example. Bangkok has red light districts that are all safe and all tastefully done. Now, if you are a tourist in Bangkok and you have no interest in, being with sex workers, it is very easy for you to spend time in Bangkok and really not have any exposure to that. But if you are interested in it, it is there and it is safe and it is well regulated and protected. And so I would recommend that Colombia actually create a tax base around sex tourism and invest that money in public services, in free university for people and other things so that people have better options. Invest that money in the public and in women so that they do not have to turn to being sex workers. And something I would like to see in places like Colombia, Thailand, and the Dominican Republic is to have sex workers have a voice in the laws and regulation that govern what they do. The simple fact is, in places where sex work is legal, prostitution is legal, sex workers are small business owners, and they should be consulted as small business owners. What can we do as a government that serves small business owners to help you maximize your profits in your small business? I suggest that we approach sex work and sex tourism as adults and try to use it to change living standards on this planet and help sex workers transition out of lives as sex workers and into other types of small business owners. I would like to see us change our long history of exploitation of each other as human beings and actually create a world economy with heart and soul. To me, our greatest legacy in this life is not to grow rich. It's not to be famous. it's to be as human as possible.